Champaign County Agriculture Today with your host, Dennis Riggs.
Hello and welcome to Champaign County Agriculture Today. My name is Dennis Riggs, your host for the next few minutes as we discuss some very important topics concerning you, agriculture, and our area. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you'll find the information and the discussion lively and entertaining for you today. On our program today, we're going to talk about an issue that affects actually everybody, everywhere. It's called urban sprawl and development. No matter if you live in the center of the city, on the edge of the city, or maybe out in the country, urban sprawl affects us all. You know, these big cities around East Central Illinois and Illinois were not always here. It all started out as farmland. We're going to talk about how this affects us with two great guests today. I have with me Bruce Knight, who is the planning director for the city of Champaign, and also have Kevin Runn, who is the senior director of local government for the Illinois Farm Bureau. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Bruce, I'm going to start out with you. You're kind of a local fella here in Champaign as director of planning. Tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up, a little bit of the education, and what brought you to the position you now hold.
Sure. I grew up in the Minneapolis area. My dad was a planner also, and he actually grew up in farm country in Iowa. So I've got a lot of relatives that are in the agricultural industry. I went to school at Iowa State, got my degree in urban planning, and got a master's in public administration from the University of Iowa. Worked in a couple of other locations in the Midwest before I came here as planning director back in November of 1988, and primarily came here for the job and just have stayed on. It's a great community.
Very good. Glad to have you with us today. Kevin Runn, I'm afraid I know too much about you. You're a native of Champaign County, but give the folks a little bit of your background and what led you to your position with the Illinois Farm Bureau.
Well, I did grow up in Pasodum area in the southern end of the county there, and was involved with the County Farm Bureau here where Dennis and I first met. At that time, I was farming with my dad and my brother. Since then, I've moved on. I've been with the County Farm Bureau system around the state in a couple of locations, and been in Bloomington with the State Farm Bureau for the past 26 years, where I've been working on local government issues, transportation issues, and this one, land use, for that period of time. Even though I'm from around this area originally, Dennis, I'll probably be focusing more on statewide issues in my comments here rather than Champaign, because it has been a few years since I've been in this area.
Well, we're glad to have you back in town, Kevin. Thank you very much. Today we're going to talk about urban sprawl and development. One word kind of sounds nasty, sprawl. That sounds not like a good thing, and development sounds progressive and positive. Both of you, Bruce working with cities, Kevin with the farmers many times, might have a different spin on this. Let's talk about definitions first. Bruce, how would you define urban sprawl?
Well, sprawl is really a pattern of development that people consider to be undesirable. I guess I would define it as significant growth occurring in locations where growth isn't appropriate. Services don't exist to support it, or infrastructure is not in place, it's unplanned for, and generally it happens in kind of a leapfrog fashion where it's jumping out beyond existing development and occurring in those locations that just aren't prepared for it.
Would you then go ahead and say that development is a more organized growth?
Well, I think development can be a more organized form of growth. It's a question of whether it's been planned for or not. And if cities do a good job of planning and trying to make sure that growth is occurring in a systematic and organized way, it's occurring mostly contiguous to the existing community, then I think that isn't technically sprawl by the definition that I would use.
Okay. Well, that's looking from the inside of the city looking out. Kevin, let's go the other direction. Let's look from the rural areas looking in. How would you define urban sprawl and then development?
Well, Bruce is exactly right. There's a lot of different ways of looking at it and defining it. One of the chief problems we run into is how do you measure it? How do you know when you've crossed that line between development and sprawl? And so I've always tried to put some kind of a quantifiable measure to it, and there are a number of ways of doing that. Some talk about the rate of growth of a community, the leapfrogging that Bruce had mentioned, the lack of infill, or what percent remains unfilled in an area before you grow again. But probably the one I find most useful and can be applied generally anywhere is the ratio between the growth in geographic area of a community and the growth in its population over the same period of time. So if you're growing in population at 5% over a 10-year period, yet your boundaries have expanded and your community has grown at 25 or 40 or 80% over that same period of time. That to me is a good definition of sprawl, because you're taking more and more space to house the same number of people that you might have in the past.
Kevin, you see across the state of Illinois different communities, different size communities, and different growth rates. Of course, in the beginning, it was all rural, so we were at 0% urban sprawl, and then as Illinois developed, there was a higher percentage, and now we have areas in some of our northern counties where there is no farmland left in a county. What have you seen in those counties? Is the intensity of opposition or interest varied based on percentage of what this growth is?
Well, it certainly varies across the state. I don't know if you can tie it directly to the percent of developed area within a county as to what the resistance or acceptance might be. Mm-hmm. In fact, maybe as you get closer to total infill in these areas, the resistance drops off. Folks basically give in to what they consider to be the inevitable and are willing to accept that kind of a thing a little easier than where there's some hope of maintaining an active society and operation at a commercial scale in those areas.
Bruce, here in Champaign County specifically, we'll talk here locally because that's your area of expertise. When sprawl happens or development happens, how does it affect the land around it?
Well, when development occurs outside the existing urban area, then I think it has a number of different impacts. Number one, it puts a lot of pressure on whatever infrastructure might exist out there. The best example for us oftentimes is the old section line township roads, which are primarily oil and chip, can't handle the increase in traffic. There may need to be other extensions of services. Police, fire protection has to be extended to an area. And so, one of the immediate impacts is perhaps on the infrastructure in that surrounding area. There's also an impact perhaps on conflict between people that are used to a more urban lifestyle and an ongoing commercial farming operation as was suggested by Kevin. So in those cases, then I think sometimes you have people complaining about, smells or dust or the kinds of products that come from an ongoing farming operation. And that's always a challenge as well.
Kevin, what have you heard on the agricultural side as the city goes out and touches more farms? And Bruce alluded to that a little bit. What do we hear on the agricultural side?
Oh, yeah, those things and plenty more. I mean, the first thing they recognize is, hey, I've got close neighbors. That's a different feel, so the aesthetics out there changes quite dramatically. Probably one of the other earliest factors they find is that traffic flow patterns have changed. They've got to change the way they move around and what they can move around or when they can move it. That certainly has an effect on them. It can change their form of operation. The practices that they typically use that are commonly accepted agricultural practices in the state might not be acceptable to some of the nearby neighbors now who aren't accustomed to that kind of thing. So whether they're applying crop protection products or whether they're raising livestock or where they're doing it, those kinds of things can change pretty quickly. Even their selection of cropping can change. We see in a lot of the areas, in the highly developed areas, moving away from the row crop kind of things to something that's more suited in an urban setting. You might move to some U-pick operations. They might change from row crop to alfalfa or haying kinds of things that don't require such intensity. They could even move to nursery or grass or sod production, those kinds of things in those areas where there's a real market nearby now. And the need for that thing. So it can change their operation significantly.
The quick question, and it's a complex question, but a simple answer hopefully. When the people went out to look at this nice lot they were going to build their new house on, the wind was blowing from north to south. Mm-hmm. And after they started building the house, the hog farm that used to be upwind is now downwind, and it just changes the complexity of that. Who has the right of way when something like that happens, Kevin?
Well, there is something in most Midwestern states called right to farm kinds of legislation. But if you look at the full title of that piece of legislation here in Illinois, it's something very similar to providing limited protections to certain operations from some nuisance suits in the state of Illinois. it really spells out that it's a very limited kind of protection. A couple of things have to happen. First of all, the operation has to have been the agricultural operation has to have been up and running for at least a year prior to the situation happening there. So there is some right of first come, first serve in those kinds of settings. However, it is very limited protection. There's nothing that prevents an individual from suing another individual for a nuisance there. And we've had cases where individuals have been sued time and time again, have won time and time again as the farmer. Yet the cost of those kind of battles or the frustration of them has simply caused them to go out of business.
Well, we know that development will happen. That's just as any growing community wants and in many places need, development's going to happen. Bruce, what do you see as growing pains for a community as it develops out into the rural areas? You talked a little bit about fire protection police. Are there others?
Yeah, I think the key impacts on a community of dealing with growth, number one, planning for it. I think, in the case of the city of Champaign, we have a comprehensive plan. In fact, we're just gearing up to start our update process, which occurs every 5 years, to do a full update. One of the things we do is to evaluate land on the fringe for its suitability for development, looking at the services that are available and what needs to be extended in order to support that, police and fire protection, public works services, the existing infrastructure and whether it needs to be upgraded. Are there sanitary sewers available? One of the factors that's been really big in creating lower density development is most municipalities back in the 70s and 80s started requiring stormwater management, stormwater detention, to prevent downstream flooding problems. However, those systems typically take up a lot of land and have reduced the overall density of development, thereby causing more land area expansion as compared to the population. But the challenges tend to be planning for the infrastructure, planning for the service extension. In our case, there's a lot of units of government that also provide different kinds of services. We have a park district, working with the park district to make sure that they're planning for future areas. We have private utility companies, a private water company and power companies. They have to think about extending services. So there's a lot of coordination also with other units of government, other agencies, as well as other businesses that play a role in setting up an area to be prepared for development.
Bruce, is there a magic number in either low density or high density of the number of people that a town can support in like a square block or a square mile? Are there any numbers like that you shoot for?
I don't think there's any magic number. Certainly a lot of communities do fiscal impact analysis and try and look at the balance of the tax generation that will occur in an area as compared to the services that it provides. But you have to look big picture. A 1 square mile addition isn't standalone. The people that live there are employed somewhere, and maybe that business is part of the overall tax base. They shop somewhere, and that sales tax dollar is part of the overall tax base. So it's about more than just property taxes. But ideally, we try and promote through our comprehensive plan the idea of a mix of densities, housing types and styles in every neighborhood throughout the city. We have, especially since our 2002 comprehensive plan update, been promoting higher density development as much as we can. We certainly encourage infill, although if you look at Champaign and Urbana for that matter, there haven't been a lot of pieces of property just left behind that didn't get developed. So infill is a little bit more challenging because it's usually about redevelopment, not just going in and finding a piece of land that somebody left behind. So the challenges, I think, are trying to make sure that there's a mix of uses, a mix of densities throughout the city that ensures a solid tax base to help support the growth and development. But it also creates more complete neighborhoods, which is, really one of our overall goals.
That's because of a good plan, right? Absolutely. Well,
I'd like to think so.
This is all very complicated, Bruce, and all these people and services and everything. And I guess I just want to simplify my life and move to the country. You hear that many times. And Kevin, for people that just want to get out of town and move to the country, what are some things that they maybe haven't thought about that they need to consider when they want to leave the city life behind and move out to their acre of green?
Well, the very first thing you're going to find is it takes them longer to get there, Dennis. And transportation and access is always an issue. And particularly if folks are accustomed to dwelling within a municipality where you've got paved streets, curbs, gutters, that kind of thing. They tend to take a lot of their expectations with them out to the country, and the street system is one of those things that often shows up. So when they get out there and they find, either a gravel road or even an oil chip road with some dust for dirt for shoulders, there's often requests, well, when are they going to improve this road? Well, there's a lot of things they need to look at before they go out there. One of the things we've tried to do for folks who find themselves in that situation is put together a little booklet we call Code of Country Living, and it's targeted at the individual who is considering a move to the country. The hard part is getting that booklet in their hands at the time they're making that decision, because once they've purchased out in the country, or once they're in seeking a building permit to build out in the country, they've made up their mind. They're already going out there. So we try to put something in their hands that will cause them to think about some of the things that are different in the country than they are in municipalities. Now, don't get me wrong, living out in the country is a great way of life. It certainly is. But you've got to bring your expectations into line with the realities of what's available and what's not available in the country.
There are a lot of things to consider. This publication has been published by the Illinois Farm Bureau, I understand, and is available at County Farm Bureau offices or through the Farm Bureau itself.
That's correct, and it's available in PDF format on our website.
Oh, okay.
www.ilfb.org.
Very good. Well, something they should consider for sure before they move out to the country. Well, let's turn this around. I'm going to go back to Bruce then. We've talked about bringing a little bit of the city life out to the country. Is there a possibility that farming or agriculture can be an integral part of green spaces in the city? Have you seen this done?
Yeah, I think that it's an interesting question. There was a planner who was the planning director in Philadelphia for many years by the name of Ed Bacon, who was pretty well known, and one of his philosophies was trying to connect the urban to the rural through city markets where people can bring their produce in, city farms where our neighborhoods can try and produce their own goods and have their gardens and not only grow for themselves but also be able to sell that as a product. Certainly there's places that do that. Even here in the city of Champaign, there's garden plots that people can rent from the Park District in order to have their gardens if they live in a more dense area and don't have space within their yard to be able to do that. One of the things that we've been working with the Champaign County Park District on is looking how we can do a better job of providing for parks, trails, and open space and new growth areas as they occur, so that people do have places to walk and both opportunities for passive recreation as well as active recreation opportunities close to them. There's a lot of research that's being done right now about the connection between health and people's lifestyle. As you live in these very low density areas, most people drive everywhere, and so trying to create more walkable neighborhoods, commercial services that people can walk to, also helps to promote a healthier lifestyle for them over time. Most of us grew up in locations where we walked to school, perhaps, and that's a lot more rare today. But encouraging those kinds of opportunities as well. All of that can lead to healthier people as well as just better places to live.
I know you've studied other towns, not just those in East Central Illinois. I think I've heard about Phoenix, Arizona being a town that's spread out, that you just have to have an automobile. All their growth was horizontal rather than up. Is that good? What's the challenges for a town that does that?
Well, I think if you go to Phoenix now, I think you'll find that they are trying to plan for increasing densities and trying to build in more transit. They've added rail lines. Most communities are trying to increase density, support transit, ensure people have a choice between means of transportation. The car shouldn't be their only solution. Champaign-Urbana is very lucky. We've got an excellent mass transit district, and trying to ensure that as we grow and develop, we do it in a way that's compatible with making sure that transit works is another key factor in good planning, I believe.
Kevin, let's turn to the rural areas. What could be done in rural areas, and what examples have you seen around where these types of services, limited as they may be, as of public transportation or public water, are we seeing more of that reach into rural areas across the state of Illinois?
Yeah, there are certainly utilities being supplied to isolated developments out in the rural areas, whether through cooperative agreement with a nearby municipality, for instance, that might supply both water and sewer type services, or they are often done through rural districts, either rural water districts or rural sewer districts that are separate independent units of government that have that single function out there and can do that. But typically in the southern part of the state where developments are further scattered, you're probably seeing the rural water and sewer districts being established to fit those rural subdivisions. In the northern area of the state where you have more municipalities throughout the area that can accommodate those kinds of things, you're probably seeing them rely more on municipal services through contract to do that sort of thing.
I know, Kevin, over in Europe, you often see where farmers live in town and commute to the country. Sure. Are you seeing any of that in Illinois?
I think I think we're seeing more of that all the time. Farmers out there that change their way of life along with the rest of society, and farms getting so large that you can't sit in your farmhouse and look out the windows and see everything that it is that you have responsibility for out there. It's somewhere off in the distance. So there's perhaps less of an attraction for all of them to be right there on the farm, particularly when there is not livestock there that has to be managed 24 hours a day.
Mm-hmm. Bruce, what about the future of planning for municipalities? Do you see any changes in the way that you're planning based on either people's desire to be close to open spaces or not? Maybe they don't want to be close to open spaces.
Well, we're definitely seeing a lot of new trends in planning that speak to the issues of trying to combat urban sprawl. The American Planning Association has been a strong advocate for what they refer to as smart growth, which is just about trying to better utilize the existing infrastructure, develop in a way that's environmentally sound, fiscally sound, try and take advantage of what you have. It recognizes that most communities are growing or want to grow. I'm a firm believer that places don't just stay the same. To a certain extent, you're either growing or you're declining, and there's planning challenges that go with both, and communities are trying to deal with both. But it's about trying to grow in a smarter way, certainly encouraging infill development, trying to promote higher densities, trying to create more walkable, complete neighborhoods. For many years, communities zoned in a way that completely separated uses. And now we're starting to rethink that. We'd like to have a balance between housing and jobs in any one part of the city so people can walk to work, bike to work, or have a short drive at worst, or take transit for that matter. We're trying to mix commercial and residential more, again, so people's commercial services are nearby, and they don't have to make a long trip in a car and back again to get the things that they need on a daily basis.
You hit on a word there that probably is very important as communities develop, and that's zoning. I'm going to ask you first, and we'll go to Kevin for the agricultural side of it. How has zoning changed? First of all, there was no zoning years ago, and now zoning has evolved. I know in some counties there's more of it than others. Tell me about zoning in this area, and from a city planning standpoint, does it help, does it hurt?
Well, zoning, of course, is a tool that's designed to help implement the plans. So first and foremost, zoning isn't a standalone document, but it's a tool, and of course when you use a tool, not every hammer needs to hit the nail. So zoning works. I think it works here for the most part. Now there's been mistakes with zoning over the years. Like I mentioned early on, zoning was designed to completely separate all uses. Well, when you completely separate all uses, you put people living in a place a long way from where they work or where they shop, and that creates problems. Zoning in some communities has been used to restrict densities. Large lot zoning has been combated in courts in many places. Here we try and encourage a mix of densities through our zoning. More and more we're promoting mixes of uses through zoning. I think zoning can be a very good tool, but it has to be regularly updated to make sure that it reflects your plans and is carrying out those plans adequately.
Kevin, one of those very important things that people used to think about when they lived in the country was their freedom to do whatever they wanted to do. And of course, zoning puts some restrictions on that. What do you see across the state as far as the use of zoning or the opposition to zoning?
Well, very specifically, there are 57 out of the 102 counties in Illinois that are zoned. So that leaves just about half the state unzoned in the outside metropolitan areas. And yeah, agriculture takes a different view of zoning depending on what development pressures are in their own locale. As you say, if you're out in the middle of nowhere and there's no development pressures, nothing coming at you, those individuals tend to view zoning as a hindrance. But if you're nearby a community and you see these outlying sprawl types of developments coming at you, then they tend to view zoning as a protection and a help. So the viewpoint shifts depending on what kind of development pressures you're nearby. Actually, I try to tell farmers out there when I talk about county zoning, particularly in those areas that are not zoned, that if you're in agriculture and you want to remain in agriculture, then you should have no concern about zoning, because in the state of Illinois, counties are prohibited from regulating agriculture through a zoning ordinance.
So go ahead, Bruce, you got a comment on that?
I was just going to add, I think your question about property rights is a very interesting one. This is a country that was founded with very strong principles of property rights, and the idea that my property rights should allow me to do whatever I want with my property is very important. At the same time, when your property rights start to bump into my property rights, somebody has to decide appropriate line where to regulate. And of course, the closer you get people together, the more dense it is, such as in a city versus a rural area, it's even more important. And that's the role of government. Government's the only institute that can decide what's the appropriate line, where to draw, where your property rights can only go so far, because otherwise they interfere with mine.
In an area that has zoning, where does the person provide their input? Where do they make their voice known for zoning issues?
It depends on where you live. In our case, it'd be the city council. City council is the final decision maker on all zoning cases. You probably would want to start with the local planning department to make sure you understand what the zoning is. If you're buying a piece of property, always find out how your property's zoned and how the surrounding properties are zoned. And not only that, but then what the comprehensive plan says, so you have a good understanding of what may end up coming in next to you.
I believe that's chapter 5 here, Bruce.
Is that in the book?
Very
Well,
good.
we want to encourage people to always look at that book.
And that applies to urban living, let me tell you as well.
Absolutely. Kevin, do you see more counties getting zoning in just the few seconds we've got left?
There is some interest out there. We have probably 3 counties right now that are not zoned that are giving a serious look at it and have been at it for a year or more in the planning process.
Okay. Well, it's complicated, yet it's simple. Property rights, we want to do the best we can with the land that we have, because as they say, they're not making any more of this land out here. So it's nice to be able to plan for the future and to develop in a logical and rational fashion. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us on our program today. We want to thank you for sharing your expertise, and we want to thank you for listening today. We hope you've gained something from our program here, and hope you'll tune in again next time when once again we have a chance to tell you what's going on here at Champaign County Agriculture Today. I'm Dennis Riggs. Thanks for listening.
Champaign County Agriculture Today is brought to you by Champaign County Farm Bureau.